Welcome back, everyone. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're taking one of the most famous narratives in human history, and we're looking at it through a completely different lens. Instead of just reading the text, we're going to physically map out a world-changing life. We'll be tracing the geographical movements, the strategic stops, and the extreme physical terrain of the life of Jesus, exactly as it's outlined in our historical source material. By tracking these literal steps, we can get a much better grip on the geographic reality behind the origins of the world's largest faith. Let's get into it. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself what history's most famous life actually looks like when you plot it out on a map? Well, to find out, we need to drop a pin way back in the year 5 BC. The setting is ancient Israel, and it's a region that is just completely crushed under the iron fist of the Roman Empire and a deeply paranoid local ruler named King Herod. The people there have been waiting centuries for a liberator, and our source material claims that right here, history is about to split right in two. All right, kicking things off with part 1, birth and exile. So our geographical journey starts off not in some fancy, comfortable palace, but on a seriously dangerous road in the ancient Middle East. 90 miles. That is the distance from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Because the Roman emperor mandated a census, a heavily pregnant teenage girl named Mary was forced to walk this grueling 90-mile stretch. It was a completely exhausting, perilous trek that finally ended in a tiny, overcrowded village. Now, the source material throws a massive, profound irony at us right here. The world naturally expected a king of kings to be born into wealth, power, and a grand palace. But the reality? A dark, cold cave used to house animals. And the very first people to witness this birth were shepherds. In ancient society, shepherds were considered absolute outcasts. They were viewed as unclean and marginalized to the point where their testimony wasn't even valid in a court of law. Yet, the narrative places them front and center in the story. And the contrasts just get sharper. On one side, you have the Persian Magi, these foreign astronomer priests who literally traveled 2 full years following a celestial sign just to find this child. On the flip side, you have the local religious priests right there in Jerusalem. They knew their own prophecies pointing to Bethlehem, which was only a 6-mile, 2-hour walk away. But they wouldn't even bother making the trip. So you have the incredible devotion of foreign astronomers whose gold would actually end up funding the family's life-saving exile to Egypt, standing in stark contrast to the utter apathy of the local religious elite. Moving on to part 2, ministry in Galilee. After spending years as refugees in Egypt, and then a quiet upbringing in the small, nowhere town of Nazareth, the timeline suddenly fast-forwards 3 decades. The public mission kicks off at a highly specific elevation, 430 meters below sea level, right at the Jordan River. That is literally the lowest point of land on Earth. It's such a fascinating detail, isn't it? The absolute highest spiritual claims of the text originate at the planet's lowest physical altitude. From there, the momentum up in the Galilee region just explodes. He sets up his home base in Capernaum, which was this bustling, corrupt border town sitting on a major international trade route, and he immediately begins challenging the established systems. His milestones completely disrupted everything. We're talking turning water into wine, physically touching and healing a leper, which was seen as an impossible cure for a divine curse, delivering the Sermon on the Mount, which turns societal power structures entirely upside down, and defying the literal laws of physics by feeding 5,000 people. His teachings and actions were sparking a wildfire of attention. Which brings us to part 3, the path to Jerusalem. The map doesn't stay in that northern region for long. The narrative shifts relentlessly southward, and every single step toward the religious capital of Jerusalem escalates the tension with the ruling religious authorities. They are deeply threatened by his massive, growing influence. It all boils over and hits a critical tipping point with this precise quote: "Lazarus, come out." According to the source, Jesus resurrects a man who had been dead and buried in a tomb for 4 days in a town right outside Jerusalem. It was his most public, most provocative miracle yet. The Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin, was utterly terrified. Driven by jealousy and a real fear that the Roman Empire would view his huge following as a violent rebellion, they officially voted to execute him. This leads us directly into part 4, betrayal and the cross. Right here, the sweeping chronological pacing deliberately slows way down. We are now tracking the intense, microscopic movements of his final 24 hours. On Thursday night, the map takes us to an olive grove called Gethsemane. The source describes Jesus experiencing something called hematidrosis. This is an extremely rare but medically documented condition where crushing psychological and physical stress
actually causes the skin's capillaries to rupture, literally mixing blood with sweat. He knew exactly the physiological horror that was about to unfold.
Following his betrayal and arrest, he's dragged through the darkness into a rapid-fire series of trials. He gets bounced from Annas to Caiaphas, then over to Pilate, down to Herod, and right back to Pilate. The text really makes a point to highlight a glaring legal irony here. The religious leaders, in their desperate rush to secure a guilty verdict for blasphemy, flagrantly broke their own laws. Jewish trials were strictly forbidden at night, forbidden during the Passover festival, and carrying out an execution on the exact same day as a verdict was totally illegal, yet they pushed it all through anyway. Pilate, the Roman governor, tries his best to find a loophole using a Passover tradition where he pardons one prisoner. And this brings up one of the most chilling historical ironies noted in the entire text. He offers the massive crowd a choice: release Jesus, the man they had literally hailed as a saving king just 5 days prior, or release a man whose name was Jesus Barabbas, a known, convicted murderer. The crowd, utterly disillusioned that their supposed warrior king was battered and refusing to raise a sword against Rome, demanded the release of the murderer instead. Pilate finally caves, and our geographical map moves 600 brutal meters through the streets of Jerusalem to a hill called Golgotha. It's really crucial to understand the horrific physiology of what happens next. Roman crucifixion wasn't just a method of execution. It was engineered terror. It was a highly public, agonizing warning. The source details that the actual cause of death wasn't bleeding out. It was asphyxiation. The condemned person had to push their entire body weight up on pierced feet just to draw a single breath, over and over, for hours on end, until total, fatal physical exhaustion set in. After hours hanging there, the source material reports his final, climactic words: "It is finished." The narrative strongly asserts that this was not a life taken from him by force, but rather a mission completed, a life willingly given up to pay a massive cosmic debt. Finally, we reach part 5, the empty tomb. We shift the pacing here as we look at the methodical resolution of the story. According to the text, on Sunday morning, the tomb was found completely empty. And it presents this profound sociological reversal. The very first witnesses entrusted with this pivotal, world-altering news were women. Remember, in ancient Jewish courts, a woman's testimony counted for absolutely nothing, zero. Yet the narrative explicitly chooses the exact people society marginalized the most to announce the single most important event in its history. Over the next 40 days, the geographic map lights up once again. The reported post-resurrection appearances spread out incredibly methodically. It starts in Jerusalem with Mary Magdalene at the tomb. Then it moves 7 miles outside the city walls on the road to Emmaus. Ultimately, it sweeps all the way back north to a mountain in Galilee. And here, the source makes a massive, heavy claim: an appearance to 500 followers simultaneously. We are no longer talking about just a handful of grieving friends claiming to see a ghost. The text claims a mass, undeniable, simultaneous witnessing. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. How did a geographical map that ostensibly ended with a crucified leader and 11 terrified, utterly discouraged disciples somehow explode into the fastest-growing faith in human history? The source points directly to that mountain in Galilee and an empty tomb in Jerusalem as the ultimate spark. It's a truly fascinating historical and geographical puzzle. If you want to understand exactly how that spark traveled across the globe through those early disciples, you'll definitely want to explore the map of the apostles next. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.